An intellectually disabled man is wrongfully accused of the murder of his sister and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Upon release, he embarks on a personal mission to find who is responsible for his sister's mysterious death. Welcome to Russ Recaps. Today I'm going to explain a 2022 drama film called Delia's Gone. So without further ado, let's get into the video. With a bleak atmosphere filled with cloudy skies and some abandoned small homes, the movie is set in a small town of Ohio. Lewis developed a symptom similar to autism after a brain injury several years ago. Delia helps to keep him stable and distant from his violent tendencies. Despite being intellectually disabled, Lewis is reasonably independent. He can drive himself to work, at the hardware store, and cook. At the beginning of the movie, we see Lewis playing the piano while Delia is singing. The scene changes to Delia and Lewis in the kitchen. Once Lewis is done cleaning the trout, he asks Delia to cook it. But Delia, on the other hand, is persistent that he should cook it himself. This is Delia's way of teaching Lewis that things change sometimes, and you have to deal with it. Delia was recently laid off from her job. She now has to tell Lewis that in order to find work, she has to move to Toledo. But Lewis prefers no change at all. She tells Lewis to just fry the trout so that they can head to town after eating. Lewis and Delia are now driving towards the town when Delia asks Lewis to pull up in front of the pharmacy and wait for her. She then grabs a gun to be able to steal Lewis's medication. With no job, Delia is short on cash, yet she makes sure that Lewis has a ready supply of medications. On their way back home, he tells Delia not to steal when she says, "Some things you can only get with a gun." At home, while drinking, Delia blurts out the fact that she has been offered a job in Toledo. She tries to convince Lewis by saying she has no other option but to leave. She got him medicines that would last him for 6 months, and he has a full-time job. Seeing Lewis's reaction, she tries to calm him down and offers him a drink, but Lewis tells her he goes to bed at 9:30 and doesn't want a drink. He believes drinking makes him mean. But Delia keeps insisting, saying that they don't live with their father anymore, and that he can do anything he wants. Lewis lashes out at her and pushes her into the wall, hurting her while telling her not to go. Once he's calm, Delia gets up to get a bottle of beer from the fridge, but instead drives away. Lewis stands at the window watching her leave. He then decides to drown his sorrows and starts drinking. The next morning, Lewis wakes up with blood on his hands and has no idea about what happened last night. He calls out for Delia but later sees her body lying on the floor of the kitchen. He tries to wake her up when he hears a knock on the door. It's the sheriff and Inspector Bo Walston. They're here to talk to Delia about the robbery at the pharmacy. But seeing Lewis's hands covered in blood, they ask him if everything is okay. All that Lewis has to say is, "Delia's gone." They ask him to step aside while they look around the house. It didn't take long for them to find Delia, lying dead on the kitchen floor. Fran pointed her gun right at Lewis and asked him what happened. They hurriedly call an ambulance when Lewis tells them he doesn't remember much since he was drinking last night. Upon asking, he admits to hurting Delia. He confesses that he grabbed her and pushed her against the wall because she has moved away, but he didn't want her to go. They get him out of the house and into the sheriff's truck. The scene then changes to Lewis at trial. But since they entered a guilty plea to voluntary manslaughter, the judge wants to hear Lewis's statement. Lewis once again admits to killing Delia. At the same time, he also believes that someone who takes the life of another person has no right to live, and he deserves to be punished. Later, the judge sentences him to 5 years in prison. Inside the facility, with all the regret Lewis had for killing Delia, he attempts to kill himself, but is saved. The scene changes to 7 years later. Lewis is now all alone at Deerhurst Behavioral Health Care, seeing a therapist. That's when one day, Lewis is told that he has a visitor. It's Stacker Cole, the last person to see Delia alive. With his shivering hands and awkward gait, Lewis meets Cole. He's mostly spaced out while he's talking about getting his life together and raising his daughter, Rosie, but when Cole mentions the fact that Delia came to see him the night she died, and that Lewis is unaware of how she died, Lewis gets frantic, and Cole is thrown out for triggering Lewis. However, Cole's visit sparks a fire in Lewis to find the truth about Delia's death. Lewis kept repeating what Cole had told him before attacking Larry and escaping the facility. Later, Bo Walton, who is now the sheriff, receives a call from the healthcare center about Lewis's escape after meeting Stacker. To get a better idea of what's going on, Bo calls up Fran. Apparently, Stacker is Fran's brother, but Fran has nothing much to say. On the other hand, Lewis continues reciting, Billy Dyson lives in Downey and Stacker calls at the tavern, until he reaches his old house. Bo and Fran go to the facility to inquire about the situation, but come across no new information, besides that Lewis was seen around his old house. At home, Lewis fills up the car tank and later finds Delia's gun in the glove compartment. He manages to dodge Bo and Fran and goes to meet Stacker. But it appears Stacker is unavailable. He's gone to pick up Rosie, so Lewis heads over to Downey to find Billy Dyson. With the help of two kids, Lewis finds Billy's address while Bo and Fran pay a visit to Stacker. They tell him how Lewis attacked his attendee and ran away after he saw him. Upon asking, Stacker reveals that he went to see Lewis to tell him the truth about Delia. Lewis is now at Billy's house. He proceeds to ask him what happened to Delia. But all Billy has to say is that he doesn't know. Lewis tells him about Stacker and how the two of them were with Delia the day she died. Hesitant, Billy takes Lewis away from his wife and son across the street to finish their conversation. Bo wants to go through Delia's file again and see if he's missed something important. At the same time, they get a feeling that Stacker is up to something sketchy, and that they should keep an eye on him too. Billy, on the other hand, tells Lewis to go home and rest, but Lewis is persistent. He pulls out the gun and forces Billy to reveal the truth. Billy reveals that he was drinking at the bar with Delia, Stacker, and his cousin Lyle. That's when all of a sudden he attacks Lewis with a scissor, but Lewis hits him in the head with a metal object and ends up killing him. Lewis cleans up and rushes out when the memory of him solving a puzzle with Delia reminds him how happy they were. The scene changes to Stacker smoking outside his house, lost in deep thought. Later, Fran calls Stacker, but he is unreachable. He is seen walking into the thick jungle as if he's looking for something. Lewis spends the night at an inn. The next day, he heads over to find Lyle Dyson at a construction site. Turns out, he took Lyle's address from Billy's phone. Bo and Fran are now at Billy's house inquiring about his death. They find out Billy's wife knew nothing about what happened the day Delia died. Lewis manages to find the construction site, but unfortunately, Lyle was fired. Lewis asks around to find out that Lyle must be drinking at a bar close by. Once Lewis found Lyle, he asked him about Delia. Lyle completely ignores Lewis at first, but when Lewis pulled his gun out, Lyle started gaslighting him into thinking that Lewis killed Delia before beating him to a pulp and leaving. Flashbacks of their happy time are all that keep Lewis going, and he pulled himself together. Fran finds Stacker and tells him about Billy's death. The two get into a heated argument about getting distant after Delia dies. Turns out Fran lost her job and developed a habit of drinking. Lewis, who still hasn't given up, drives to Lyle's trailer. But before he can see him, Lyle kills himself. However, Lyle's sister, who is unable to see, calls the police telling them that Lewis killed Lyle. Fran shows up to meet Lyle, but Bo has already beaten her to it and tells her about Lyle killing himself. At home, Rosie attends a call from Lewis asking about Stacker. She tells Lewis that he's at the tavern. She then receives a call from Fran, yet again asking about Stacker's whereabouts, and tells her about her talk with Lewis. Lewis, all riled up, is now driving to the tavern, and so is Fran. Lewis finds Stacker before Fran does. It appears that he's been drinking. Lewis points the gun at him and urges him to finish talking about what happened to Delia. Stacker starts narrating what happened that day. He reveals that all of them were drunk, but they somehow made it to the bunker in the woods. Lewis asks Stacker to take him to the bunker. As they're walking toward the bunker, Fran arrives at the tavern. Once they reach the bunker, Stacker asks Lewis about what Billy had told him. That's when Fran shows up at the bunker too. Stacker continued that once he, Billy, Lyle, and Delia were in the bunker, Lyle started kissing Delia, but then he wanted more. Delia, however, was reluctant and tried to fight Lyle off, but he was too strong for her. Once he had gotten his way with her, it was Billy's turn next, and somewhere along the line, Delia must have hit her head, and that's what could have been the cause of her death. Lewis then confronted him about how Delia got back home. Turns out, Stacker called Fran, and that she was the one who put her dead body back in the house. In Fran's defense, when she reached the bunker, Stacker was all alone with Delia's dead body. She did all that just to protect her little brother, and to put the blame on Lewis. Stacker then apologizes to Lewis and promises to confess, which will clear Lewis's name and will make people think differently of him. However, Lewis doesn't care what others think of him. All he wanted was to find the truth. That's when Bo shows up at the bunker and shoots Lewis, but fortunately Lewis survives. With the closure that he needed, Lewis is now back at the healthcare center, living a happy life. With that being said, that's all for today. Please don't forget to subscribe to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.